Onslaught yet against Islamic State. Thousands of troops are trying to push the terror group out of Iraq's second largest city. The fear is a long and bloody fight to the death.
Not only are the Islamic State fighters diehards, they've seeded the entire battlefield with thousands of booby traps and landmines.
Also tonight, toddler Ben and the discovery that means he did die in an accident in Kos.
The UKIP MEP who collapsed after a fight quits the party tonight, saying it's ungovernable.
Rain, what rain? Manchester defies the downpours to celebrate our Olympic and Paralympic heroes.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mark Austin and Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. The biggest all-out assault on the terror group calling itself Islamic State is well underway in Iraq tonight. Thousands of troops, supported by American airstrikes, have begun laying siege to the IS stronghold of Mosul. Aid agencies say the onslaught, which may last several months, could lead to a major humanitarian disaster. Mosul has been under Islamic State control since the summer of 2014. As many as 8,000 fighters are expected to defend it to the death.
Advancing towards them are a coalition of around 30,000 troops, mainly from the Iraqi army and militia forces, but also from the Kurdish Peshmerga, operating from bases to the north and east. Our senior international correspondent, Johnny Irvine, has been on the front line with the Peshmerga. Here's his eyewitness report on the beginning of the battle for Mosul.
The starting guns of this historic battle fired their first volleys in the pre-dawn of what was a critical day here. Kurdish fighters known as Peshmerga were the ones to launch the opening phase of the Mosul assault, and that was fitting, for it's the Kurds who've done the most to hold the line against Islamic State. That cruel caliphate would have grown much larger were it not for Kurdish bravery. And there was plenty of that determination on show again here today as they pushed towards Mosul. These pro-Iraqi forces are still several miles from the gates of Mosul. There are a few villages that have to be cleared first, and that's going to be difficult. Not only are the Islamic State fighters diehards, they've seeded the entire battlefield with thousands of booby traps and landmines. The signal for the beginning of the assault was an overnight appearance on television by the Iraqi Prime Minister. He declared that the hour of victory had come. However, his chief of staff fears and expects a protracted battle to conquer Mosul. His prediction to us was no more optimistic than liberation by Christmas. Here is an example of what they're up against. The Kurds try but fail to stop a suicide car bomber. The tanks scatter, but one cannot escape the attack. This was one of today's lead columns, pressing ahead, creating its own path because of the threat of landmines. Kurdish tank fire and coalition air power was sufficient to persuade at least some IS fighters to make a run for it. Suddenly, there's a car speeding right to left, heading for Mosul. The tank just misses it. They don't know exactly how many IS fighters are in each of these villages. What they do know, however, is that there are absolutely no civilians there, and that is allowing the coalition to pour in ordnance with a free hand. By contrast, there are up to 1 million civilians trapped inside Mosul. It's not clear if they'll be able to flee, but in case they are, huge tracts of countryside are being turned into refugee camps in waiting. Beating IS in Mosul could have a high price indeed, but the fanatics declared war on the world, and now a host of nations has combined to ensure their downfall.
Well, John has now returned safely to nearby Erbil in northern Iraq, and a little earlier he told us about how the operation was going so far.
All things considered, I think today generally went well. The Kurdish fighters, the Peshmerga, managed to reach all the villages they were meant to. They didn't go into all of them, however, because of the ongoing threat of ambush and booby traps. We understand that they lost 6 fighters during today's operation. We're not sure how many fighters IS lost. We do know that at least a dozen of them surrendered, which may indicate, as the Iraqi army's been claiming, that morale amongst the Islamic State is not as high as it was. But I think it's dangerous to draw any comparisons between attacks on small villages and the upcoming assault on the large, densely populated city that Mosul is. There are genuine concerns that that operation could be long and messy.
John Irvine speaking to us a little earlier there. And in another historic city in the Middle East, this time in neighbouring Syria, another battle is raging tonight. And ITV News is on that front line too, in Aleppo. 14 members of the same family, including children, were reportedly killed today in fresh airstrikes on the city. Russian and Syrian government forces have promised to pause their attacks on Thursday to allow rebels and civilians to leave. Our correspondent Dan Rivers reports from inside Aleppo on the daily struggle to survive.
In Aleppo, the cycle of killing starts before sunrise. The city's famous citadel, once a symbol of Aleppo's heritage, now a symbol of its repression. From here, artillery and snipers start their day's work, showing no mercy to those besieged in the east. Getting near the front line involves a journey through a labyrinth of shattered history in the old town. Once teeming souks, now lifeless and gathering dust. Amid the ruined splendour, Assad's war grinds on, bullet by bullet. The citadel grotesquely returned to its original purpose, a fortress. But it's sniper bullets, not arrows, now fired from these battlements. The Syrian army leads us through their positions, pointing out the enemy at the end of the street. Just beyond the upturned tank are rebels watching for any movement, part of Aleppo's war of attrition.
This is about as close as we can get to the front line. We're only about 20 metres away. These screens have been put up to stop rebel snipers on the other side picking off government troops.
But all too often it is civilians living on the edge who are caught in this crossfire. In this smashed apartment block we find a mother who was shot through the leg when 7 months pregnant. She and her baby son survived. Her husband is a soldier who has family in eastern Aleppo and fears they'll be killed if he shows his face.
It's a massacre, really it's a massacre. We have to end this. We have to end this nightmare.
But there's little chance of that while the Syrian army has victory in its sights at any cost. Here at Bustan al-Qasa, the black flag of a jihadist rebel group shows how close the front lines are. This is supposed to be a designated crossing point for those who dare to leave the siege, but few have that opportunity. Only the brave would try with Russian jets circling above. The rebels' attempts to shoot it down, woefully short of the target. It was that Russian air power that finally defeated rebels here in the western suburb of Beni Zaid. After 4 years of resistance, this is all that's left of the local swimming pool. A government minder shows me the network of tunnels dug by the rebels. This is how entrenched the battle for Aleppo has become. And nearby, an illustration of its complexity. US-backed Kurdish rebels enjoying an uneasy truce with the Syrian army. I cross the front line for a few fleeting seconds until I'm ushered away. The day ends as it began. Aleppo's cycle of killing resumes in a city riven with hatred. Dan Rivers, ITV News, Aleppo.
The family of missing toddler Ben Needham are said to be devastated and distraught after detectives told them they are certain he died close to where he was last seen 25 years ago. On Saturday, search teams are thought to have found a toy car Ben had with him when he disappeared on the Greek island of Kos.
Police showed the car to Ben's mother, Kerry, who for so long has clung to the hope that one day he would be found alive, as Emma Murphy reports.
For a quarter of a century, no one seemed to know what happened to Ben Needham. He was the little boy who vanished apparently without trace, triggering a 25-year search. Now, finally, there is a belief that Ben died on the day he disappeared, just yards from his family.
It is my professional belief that Ben Needham died as a result of an accident near to the farmhouse here in Heracles, where he was last seen playing.
That news comes at the end of 3 emotional and challenging weeks of searching close to the farmhouse where Ben was being looked after by his grandparents back in July 1991. The searches began after someone living nearby told police the child had been knocked over by a digger driven by this man, Konstantinos Barkas. Mr. Barkas, who is now dead, was said to have buried Ben nearby. Having been given 2 locations, police began to excavate the sites and on Saturday found at least one item Ben had with him at the time, possibly a toy car. It's been shown to his family ahead of forensic tests.
All the members of the family that were present when I shared this information with them and actually showed the item were quite clearly devastated, distraught and very upset. It was a very emotional moment for everybody that was present at that time.
Ben's mother, Kerry, was 19 when she and the family began their appeals for information, facing accusation, suspicion and hostility as they tried to find out what had happened to him. For all her adult life, she's believed Ben was abducted and issued images of what he may look like. At the start of the latest searches, Kerry, who's now 43, spoke of her fears about finally discovering what happened.
We've lived for 25 years with that hope that one day he will come through the door, and we don't want to accept it. It's going to be difficult, really, really difficult.
And so now, finally, the family have some idea what happened to Ben, but they are still without his body and the chance to finally lay him to rest. Emma Murphy, ITV News.
Well, ITV Yorkshire's Duncan Wood is in Cos tonight. Duncan, if South Yorkshire Police are so convinced that Ben did indeed die on the island, why have they stopped digging?
Basically, they don't think they need to go any further, Mary. They've gone through 1,200 tonnes of earth over the last 3 weeks, and they feel that they've done enough. They're working with some of the leading forensic archaeologists in the world, people who've worked on 9/11 and the 7/7 bombings, and they've told them that the land beside me, where they made that discovery on Saturday morning, is down to its base level. They don't need to go any further here. They've done all they can. Now, the item is going to be taken back to Sheffield to be further examined. We still don't know exactly what it is, but Kerry Needham tonight is as convinced as South Yorkshire Police that her son did not make it past 24th of July 1991. He would have been 27 in 2 weeks' time. In fact, he never made it to his 2nd birthday.
Duncan Wood in Cos, thank you.
Now, the UKIP MEP, who was hospitalised after a fight in the European Parliament, has tonight quit, calling the party ungovernable and toxic. Stephen Wolfe says UKIP lacks direction without Nigel Farage in charge. Let's go over to our political correspondent, Paul Brand in Westminster. And, Paul, another unexpected twist in the UKIP story.
Absolutely, and Stephen Wolfe hasn't held back tonight in quitting the leadership contest and quitting the party to boot, saying the last straw for him was that tussle in Strasbourg with his colleague, the MEP Mike Hookham, which left him unconscious on the floor of the European Parliament and then in hospital for several days afterwards for treatment. He said tonight what happened in Strasbourg, combined with the infighting and toxicity since the summer, have demonstrated to me one cold, hard fact. UKIP, without Nigel Farage leading it, and the Brexit cause to unify it, has resorted to damaging infighting. Indeed, the party I joined in 2011 is now ungovernable. This is a huge blow for UKIP. Stephen Wolfe was the obvious candidate to lead this party. To be honest, he was the obvious candidate last time around when Diane James won but later resigned. Stephen Wolfe didn't get his papers in on time during that particular contest. It is difficult to point to another candidate with his profile, with his ability to unify the party. Whatever happened in Strasbourg earlier this month, it may well prove to have been the fatal blow for UKIP.
All right, Paul, thank you very much indeed.
A group of refugee children, including some displaced by the war in Syria, have arrived in Britain. There were emotional scenes as the 14 were reunited with family here after travelling from the so-called jungle camp in Calais. They are the first of more than 100 unaccompanied children set to come here before the camp is demolished.
The new head of the government's troubled inquiry into historical child abuse says there will be no scaling back of the investigation. But Professor Alexis Jay admitted there will have to be changes. The inquiry has been hit by controversy since it was set up 2 years ago by the then Home Secretary, Theresa May, as our political correspondent Carl Dinnan reports.
The inquiry into child abuse in institutions, from churches to councils to Parliament, is now on its 4th chairwoman. And today she spoke for the first time to say the inquiry's terms of reference will not be scaled back as some had feared, but the way it works will be.
If we were to pursue the traditional public hearing model that people associate with inquiries of this kind to the thousands and thousands of institutions in England and Wales, we would fail. So there is no possibility that we can do that.
Some survivors groups who had feared for the inquiry's future agree this is a necessary step. Is it worth the compromise the inquiry is having to make of not having public hearings into every institution?
I think the most important thing is that the inquiry takes place. We've had far too many people and institutions sniping at it, wanting to undermine it, wanting it to end. I'm so pleased that they have not succeeded in that wish.
But the expenditure of public money on Dame Lowell Goddard, who quit as inquiry chair, is still being questioned after allegations were made about her behaviour. This seemed to be as much as the Home Secretary knew about it.
In her letter, she said she was lonely and felt that she could not deliver, and that was why she stepped down. Dame Lowell has strongly refuted the allegations about her, and the only way we could understand properly why she resigned would be to hear from Dame Lowell herself.
So although the inquiry does seem to be getting back on track and hoping for significant progress within 4 years, the recriminations around how it has been run have not finished either. Carl Dinnan, ITV News, Westminster.
8 men have been convicted of sexually exploiting teenage girls in Rotherham.
The men, aged between 30 and 40, were found guilty of rape and indecent assault on 3 young girls. One of the girls was just 13 when the offences took place between 1999 and 2003.
The Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, insists the NHS will learn lessons from mistakes which result in deaths or serious injury to babies. He launched a new compensation scheme in England aimed at speeding up claims which can take more than 11 years to settle. As Ali Lockwood reports, some bereaved parents feel like they've been forgotten.
These footprints are one of the few precious memories Lauren Petrie has of her baby girl. Her daughter died just days before her birth, and Lauren's grief was compounded by the torment of not understanding why.
When you have a situation where your baby's died and you don't get those answers and you don't really ever get to the bottom of why it's happened, and you feel like, from a parent's perspective, that it's almost being brushed under the carpet a little bit.
Joshua Titcombe died of septicemia just 9 days after he was born. But his parents had an 8-year wait to find out 2 midwives failed to spot the symptoms. Alex Brady died after medical staff failed to intervene during a difficult birth. His parents waited 7 years for the midwife responsible to be struck off. The Health Secretary wants to end these lengthy legal battles for parents and improve NHS maternity care, which has one of the worst records in the world for stillbirths.
We put parents through the agony of a court battle that for a brain-injured baby will take an average of 11.5 years, at precisely the moment when they're coming to terms with the massive challenges of bringing up a disabled child that they weren't expecting to have to do.
Every year, 500 cases of possible negligence in maternity are assessed. And last year, over £500 million was spent by NHS England compensating for its mistakes. As well as a new compensation scheme, today's announcement includes £8 million for staff training and an Ofsted-style rating system for all maternity units. But some warn these new measures don't address the greatest threat to maternity care, which is the severe shortage of midwives. Sally Lockwood, ITV News.
And finally, tens of thousands of people turned out in Manchester this evening to honour Britain's record-breaking Olympic and Paralympic heroes. Around 400 athletes were at the special homecoming parade, including many who helped win a combined 214 medals.
Yes, the famous Manchester weather may have made it seem a long way from Rio, but it didn't dampen the spirits, as our sports editor Steve Scott explains.
There were memories, medals and some typically local weather in Manchester this afternoon. The gold medals reflecting a golden age for Britain's Olympians and Paralympians. For the athletes themselves, an opportunity to thank armchair fans who survived on very little sleep for weeks on end during the summer.
Quite something this, Max.
Yeah, it's pretty special. You know, I didn't get to do the London 2012 one, so to do this one, see how many people have turned out, even when it's raining, it's brilliant to see.
It is amazing. The great British public are really behind us, and like I said, without them we probably wouldn't have done as well as we did.
All around the athletes, thousands chanting and cheering, creating a noisy human frame along the parade route.
If organisers had been concerned the Rio glow may have dimmed, they needn't have been. Manchester has turned out in force to shout "well done" at the top of its voice.
For one fan's favourite, today marked the end of a stunning career.
I will 100% miss this. I might be gate crashing some floats in the future, but yeah, this is such a highlight of the sport, and when we've done so well collectively as a team, and we get to celebrate like this, it's incredible, and I'll definitely miss this.
Smiling through the downpours, these are the best teams Britain has ever assembled, better even than 2012. Their record medals tally achieved without the surge of home support in London 4 years ago.
It's fantastic. It's just great for all the family to come. It's so inspiring to see these people.
It's fantastic they've come to Manchester. We're just so proud of our team, our heroes, and really chuffed. And it's great the children could all enjoy it as well.
It is the last time we'll see some of these athletes in Team GB kit. But new heroes will undoubtedly emerge, inspired by Rio and captivated by today's reception. They'll dedicate their next 4 years trying to emulate the class of 2016. Steve Scott, ITV News, Manchester.
Great scenes.
Fantastic.
What's a bit of rain? They deserve it.
What rain. That's all for now. Tom Bradley will be here with news at 10.
But from all the evening news team, have a great night. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.